Well, greetings one and all. Welcome to the Art of the Ages. I am your host, Paul Lytle. So, today I got online. I am recording this a couple days early, so it's not going to be quite new when you see this, but I was perusing my Facebook page and found a link to Doug Wilson's new blog post, part of his No Quarter November, and it's here that I have discovered that Doug Wilson's been listening to my podcast, because he's talking exactly what we've been talking about the last few weeks. This actually should not be a surprise because between Tolkien, Francis Schaeffer, Doug Wilson, these are the people who've really kind of formed my opinions about art. And so it should be no surprise that Doug Wilson is talking about the same thing, since I mostly picked it up from him. Especially his Angels in the Architecture book, which I think if you've already read on fairy stories, then Angels in the Architecture should be a follow-up. It's a fantastic book, and very much worth your time as a writer. Doug Wilson also has actually a book on writing called Wordsmithing, and it's actually one of the maybe a couple of books on writing that I thought was really worthwhile. And so, but today's topic is we're going to be looking at his latest blog post. I'm going to put this in the show notes, but for those who are watching on YouTube, we are going to show it right here. It is on the blog and Mablog site, dougwills.com. Modern Art and the Death of Culture, which is released on November 26th, 2018. Again, check the show notes page for check the show notes for links to this. But a couple of things that we're going to hit on, because they're going to line up exactly where we're going with things. And so Doug Wilson, it takes me multiple episodes to say this stuff. Doug Wilson could put it in a single blog post, and he does fine. But so here we go. The section, we're going to scroll down a little bit to this section called Two Ways. There are two ways for the artist to go, and one ends with the destruction of all artistry. There are two definitions of art, in other words, and one of them is a death trap. The death trap approach makes everything depend on the will of the artist. Art is defined as whatever an artist does. If an approved member of the guild produced it, then it is a work of art. Nothing determines what is or is not art apart from the intention of the artist. And however reluctant this community of artists might be to pour out accolades on others for this kind of thing, it is the price that they have to pay in order to get their accolades when it's turn. This is why the layman's critique, "My 5-year-old could do better than this," falls on deaf ears. That 5-year-old, whatever his other merits, is not a member of the guild. All right, so we're actually going to be getting more into, kind of a lot of the different definitions of art as we go. But, essentially when we're dealing with some of the stuff that we've been talking about in the last few episodes about, why we create and how, how we approach this. When I talked about kind of the postmodern instinct to, instead of following God's, what God laid out, what the example God gave us in that taking chaos and turning it into order, the postmodern instinct is to take order and change it into chaos. And so what Doug Wilson's getting at here is, okay, so anyone can do that. I have 2 young kids. They make chaos quite well, thank you very much. And so what is it that makes their scribblings not art, and the other chaos that has been produced art? And what Doug Wilson is saying is that, well, one's made by an artist, of course. The second definition of art, I'm reading further into the article. The second definition of art, the Christian definition, requires a work of art to conform to an external and objective standard of beauty. That objective standard is grounded in the nature of God himself, who is himself arrayed in the beauty of holiness. And when the artist in grateful imitation, reflects, captures, mirrors, reproduces, and holds something of that glory, the result is a work of art. So moving on a little bit into, so does God like it? The test for every aesthetic endeavor should be this: does God like it? The standard that every critic should apply is the same. Does God like it? If not, then I shouldn't either. If he does, then I may throw myself into lawful appreciation. And we, he expands on that. Expand on that a little bit, but I wanted to get back in a little bit later. So you have a favorite band. Does God like your band? You have a picture hanging over your mantelpiece. Does God like it? What does Jehovah think of the photograph you selected for your computer's wallpaper? I mean, God either likes your stuff or he doesn't care. That about exhausts all options, right? If God doesn't care about it, where do we get off caring about it? If God dislikes it, what business do we have liking it? But if God likes what we have done, then we may proceed with joy and exuberance. Okay, so in our initial reaction to this, unless this is something that you've been digging into, I can almost guarantee you is just going, you're bristling right now. And I totally understand that. Because so often that we're taught that art is subjective. By the way, the people who tell us that art is subjective, when we don't like something we're supposed to like, they will just rip into us. I had a professor. This was a master's level professor who sent us looking at some modern art that I thought was just utter nonsense. And later in the course, I got into a debate with her because I was starting to really get into some of the fantasy art that was created electronically on a computer. And she had just kind of made the blanket statement that, if you make something on the computer, it's impossible to be art. And I contradicted her on that and said, no, that I don't think that's true. And we had a nice little debate. So what I did was I brought her some examples of this guy's art, and her reaction was amazing. Because what she said was that it wasn't art because it wasn't realistic enough. And I immediately pointed out that, oh, well, great. Because if being realistic is the standard by which we're judging these things, then the position I took on that modern artist a few weeks ago has borne out right, and that's not art, that's garbage, and and to her credit, she just kind of, yeah, that's a good point, because she'd been caught. She didn't have actually a standard for what was art at all. She just kind of made it up beforehand, and she wasn't gonna contradict it. And so, she would have been totally into the art is subjective crowd. But when I criticized the modern artist, then I'm, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm an uneducated boob out there who just doesn't understand such things, and then when I show her something else that I like, her standards shift. It's amazing to me. The degree that people will go when you don't like something that is in that modern worldview, that worldview that wants to tear down, that wants to take that order, to make it into chaos, that is just ripping things apart and calling it art, and what I would call making fools of themselves. But obviously they would disagree with me on that point. But when you don't like those things, then you're called all sorts of names. You know, it's really funny, and I say not ha-ha funny, but as in we're starting to lose other art forms as well. I'm starting to see this with movies and video games. You know? I mean, it was only last year that The Last Jedi came out, and it wasn't good. It wasn't good. And when you said that, people literally said that you were racist. Very recently, there's been a couple of video games that have either been announced or that have come out, and most recently has been Fallout 76, and prior to that, the announcement of a Diablo mobile game. And when the fans did not react well to those things, they were called entitled, and they were mocked for not cheering the things that they didn't like. And that's the things that we're seeing in modern art, modern music, in modern poetry. It's I mean, goodness, poetry has been this way for a long time. You dare to criticize some of this drivel that people will produce and say, oh, this is such great art, and you can come up with the most rational grounds ever to say you don't like it, but no, you're ignorant and unsophisticated, and that is because we all have a standard for art. The question must come down to exactly where Doug Wilson puts the question. Does God like it? And I love the way he puts it, because, as we were going to go on, I was going to put it in a way that was not nearly as succinct or effective. But does he either likes it, he dislikes it, or he doesn't care. And in any of those reactions, as children of God, we should follow suit. I do not buy the idea that art is subjective. Okay? By the simple fact of what Doug Wilson is talking about, God has an opinion on it, and his opinion is definitive. It is the proper opinion. And so if God dislikes something, it's very difficult for us then to say, well, God, that's just your opinion, man. I mean, we do that all the time. We do that all the time. But it's not it's not a proper response to that. So then the tricky thing is, and this is kind of where art comes across as being subjective, is what does God like? And I mean, we're going to get farther into that. And and some people are going to say, well, it's getting to be Christmas time right now, and some people are going to say, well, the movie's on the Hallmark Channel because they're wholesome and pure, and mention church every once in a while. Or somebody will say, some Christian movie because they'll shoehorn in the gospel at some point. And I might, I'll probably disagree with those things. It's like, well, okay, that's great. You shoehorned in the gospel, but the movie's terrible. Yeah, and I think that God's opinion on art is a little bit more complex than how many times did we actually say the word God. But that's a lot of how we treat it. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s listening to Christian music, and back then we had the answer to any secular band. It's like, oh well, you like U2, but now you become a Christian, so you must burn all U2's albums. But don't worry, we have another band that sounds like U2, but they use the word God more. And and we find out much later that half those bands go off the plantation or held heretical beliefs or whatever the case may be. But it doesn't really matter because they used the word God, a sufficient number of times. I think we can do better than that. And I think that God has given us enough to do much better than that when it comes to judging art and trying to figure out whether something is good or not. And so that's part of our quest. That's part of part of why we're here, right? Is because if we understand what God likes, then we in turn can use that understanding to make good art. And that is truly critical to our endeavor to become good writers. So, gosh, that is not the episode I had planned today, but goodness, Doug Wilson starts talking about the exact same thing that we're talking about. We got to go there. We just got to go there. So I really appreciate that. We'll continue this next week. This is an ongoing. This is going to be an ongoing endeavor for us, and we are going to be jumping into some more practical stuff here in the near future as we're starting to lay a foundation for what we're trying to accomplish. We're going to start doing another foundation of how do we accomplish that. And so, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. I really, really do appreciate it. We will be back next week. In the meantime, never, never, never stop telling stories to one another. Thank you.